Welcome to Bible study. This is the week of October 10th. That's when we'll be gathering to discuss these texts on Sunday morning. If you are able to come, we'd love to see you there. If not, you can read along with us, and we'll give you a little introduction to these beautiful texts today, and get you ready for Bible study too. We're going to be looking at chapters 20 and 21 of 1 Samuel. And Psalm number 34. So if you have your Bible handy, I would encourage you to open that up as we talk a little bit about them and give us a little introduction to what we can expect. Chapter 20 of 1 Samuel. Let's begin there. Remember how we're reading these texts. We see David as a kind of a stand-in character. He's sort of the embodiment of the people of Israel at this point. He's going through a lot of things that the Deuteronomist is saying this is a little like what we're going through. And he's asking for the reader, the traumatized, exilic person, to emotionally identify with some of the things that are happening to David. And he's asking them to see their lives a little bit through the lens of King David. Now, this is a big, long story, and so the whole scope of the story is always kind of lurking in the back of the mind of those readers. They all know who David is. None of this is new information for them. But by asking them to come back and revisit these stories, by hearing them anew, it gives them a chance to emotionally process what's going on. And so think about these stories kind of in terms of their emotional content. Think of what it would have been like to be David. Think about how David is feeling. And especially notice how David sometimes looks like he's in exile. Particularly in this first chapters of his life, this is where most of the Psalms are associated as David is running for his life. And there's where we find David today. Initially, we get the story of David's friendship with Saul's son Jonathan. And this just makes it all the more poignant in that David and Jonathan were friends. They were very, very good friends. I mean, this is one of the great texts of the ancient world that talk about the virtue, the blessing of friendship. And David and Saul's son Jonathan have become very good friends. David fled from Naioth in Ramah, and he came before Jonathan, it says. And he just asked him, "What have I done? Why? What is my guilt? What is my sin against your father that he is trying to take my life?" David can't understand what is happening. He is utterly flummoxed, perplexed by what is going on. And I believe it's really important to remember that those people in exile, when these huge traumatic things happen, that's one of the primary questions people ask is, what is going on? Why is this happening to us? And Jonathan just simply says, I don't know. Far be it. He says he can't even believe that it is that way. His father surely is not trying to kill him. Far from it. You shall not die. My father does nothing, great or small, without disclosing it to me. He would tell me if he was trying to kill you, wouldn't he? But David said, your father knows well that you like me, and that he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, or he will be grieved. But truly as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, there's but a step between me and death. And there's the line that I think really connects David with that exilic audience. There is but a step between me and death. I'm walking on this sort of razor-thin, ridge. And if I take a step right or left, I fall down and die. David is on the edge. And those people felt on the edge of destruction. Jonathan, however, refuses to believe this. He goes and has conversations with his father. And David, and he kind of hatched this plan. David is afraid even to show up again at some of the official events where he's supposed to be as a member of Saul's court, as one of the commanders of Saul's army. David has an obligation to be present for certain gatherings that are going to happen. And there's a chair assigned to David in Saul's event. And David said, I'm not going. And they hatch this plan where David has an excuse. He's going to go and do some family things. And in the ancient world, family really trumped everything. David doesn't show up. And when he doesn't, Jonathan says, well, he had this family thing he had to go to. And when he doesn't show up the second day, Jonathan is making a defense for him. And Saul finally turns on him and says, why has the son of Jesse not come to the feast, either yesterday or today? And Jonathan answered him, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go. Our family is holding a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. Remember, David's one of the little brothers in that family, and so the older brothers, they're the ones who have priority, or they have the command structure in that household. Let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason he has not come. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. He said, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives upon the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. Saul is probably right in this. I mean, there's a time when you say, well, wait a minute. Is Saul actually as mad as people think he is? There's reason behind it. He's thinking in the way of the world, but he's thinking very accurately in the way of the world. And the truth is that quite often dynasties don't get established. And that if there is a general or a commander of the army or something who is stronger and better than the king, that person is oftentimes next in line for the throne, no matter what the king says about who should be his heir. And Saul can see it. And he tells Jonathan, you're not going to be king if David doesn't die. It's you or him. To his credit, Jonathan goes out and by this prearranged schema saves David. They have this thing with arrows, and if he tells the boy to go look for the arrows farther, it's bad. And that's what Jonathan does. The whole thing kind of just dissolves them because he sends the little boy home, and their whole schema to do this in secret ends as David and Jonathan finally embrace and see one another and really express their friendship to each other once more. And then David really has to run. He leaves from there. Now we're in chapter 21. And he comes to Nob, to the priest Ahimelech. And we need to kind of hold this story for a little bit. It's going to show up next week as we look in the next story. But for this time, we just need to know he goes to Ahimelech, and Ahimelech is really afraid. What is David doing here? David is this important person. And David says, I'm on a secret mission for the king. And Ahimelech goes, okay, what do you need? And David says, have you got anything to eat? Have you got a sword? Because I had to leave in haste and I couldn't grab mine. And Ahimelech says, oh, yeah, I've got a sword. The one you stole from, or you took from Goliath the giant, is here behind the altar. And David says, I'll take it. There's none like it. Ahimelech then gives him the bread that was intended, for the priests. And David takes it and goes. But you'll just want to notice that there was somebody there, a guy by the name of Doeg. And he's the chief herdsman for Saul. The king would have had his own flocks and herds, which probably were used to feed his army. And Saul has somebody in charge of those things, and that's a guy, an Edomite by the name of Doeg. Note that name, it's going to show up next week. But for our purposes, and what we really want to look at is this last little section of chapter 21. David arose and fled that day from Saul, and he went to King Achish of Gath. The servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has killed his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish of Gath. So he changed his behavior before them. He pretended to be mad when in their presence. He scratched marks on the doors of the gate and let his spittle run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, "Look, you see this man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" Look at what has happened to David. He first of all has had to run to the enemy. Achish, the king of Gath. Gath is one of the 5 cities that belong to the Philistines. These are the traditional enemies of Israel all the way back. I mean, Samson is fighting against the Philistines back in the book of Judges long ago. These are really part of the river peoples, or I'm sorry, the sea peoples who have suddenly shown up on the scene. The Egyptians also speak of the arrival of these guys. We think they're actually coming out of the region of Greece, but we're not sure. And we're not sure why suddenly there was this mass movement and this breakdown of the late Bronze Age culture. It's still a kind of a great mystery. There was this huge upheaval, and one of the parts of that was the people out of the region somewhere around in Greece, Crete, and the Aegean, they just come streaming out of there. And they first try and land in Egypt. The Egyptians manage a strong defense and repulse them, and they kind of bounce off and end up in that region of Israel, close to Egypt, right along the coast. And you know it today as the region of Gaza. This is the region where the Palestinians are kind of cooped up in one of the most densely populated parts of the planet today, is this region of where Gath is found. He goes to this king. This is the enemy of Saul. He's turned coat a little bit. He's fled at least to this, kind of under the principle that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And he has shown up in the court of Achish, king of Gath. But Achish's counselors look at David rather askance, and they say, "Wait a minute. We know this guy. In fact, we fought against this guy. He is David. They sang about him that he killed his tens of thousands." And David hears this and realizes that they may not accept him. And so he takes a very interesting tactic. He pretends to be insane. He pretends to be mad. In the ancient world, and still in many parts of the world today, mental illness, insanity, is not perceived of as a disease so much as being touched by God, as being somebody who is almost set apart and holy. But it also is often a person that is given sort of a social protection. They oftentimes take care of these people. They realize they can't take care of themselves, and so they're kind of off limits to pick on them, hurt them, harm them. And David pretends to be insane. Think about that. If you're one of those exiled people, the lengths to which you've had to go to save your life. Have you had to lose all your dignity? Have you had to pretend to be someone that you're not? Have you had to lose everything? Run away in haste, not even able to pick up something to eat, not able to grab a weapon on the way out the door? Were you dependent on the goodwill of friends and even of enemies? And was that goodwill sometimes in short supply? Turn now to the Psalter with me. We're going to go to Psalm number 34. Psalm 34. And this is a psalm of David, and the inscription says, when he feigned madness before Abimelech. Now, sometimes these inscriptions, you will see critical confusion. So we don't know whether this was a longer inscription that got condensed, because Abimelech sounds like Ahimelech. They're kind of related to each other, those words are, and so it sounds more like the name of the priest. So that he drove him out, and he went away. So we think the inscription may be somewhat corrupted, but it clearly wants to connect to this story. He's faking madness, and you've got this Abimelech in there instead of Achish. David writes, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. Notice he's raving sometimes. But this is the real David. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. Let the humble hear and be glad. O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and delivered me from all my fears. Look to him and be radiant, so your faces shall never be ashamed. This poor soul cried and was heard by the Lord, and was saved from every trouble. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. O taste and see that the Lord is good. Happy are those who take refuge in him. O fear the Lord, you his holy ones, for those who fear him have no want. The young lions suffer want and hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come, O children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Which of you desires life and covets many days to enjoy good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. The face of the Lord is against the evildoers, to cut off the remembrance of them from the earth. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and rescues them from all their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord rescues them from them all. He keeps all their bones, and not one of them will be broken. Evil brings death to the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned. Think about, the psalm very clearly is saying, trust God. And that when trouble comes, and it says many afflictions afflict the righteous, but the Lord delivers. That when one is in these conditions like David, as David was, we end here with David faking his madness, and David running for his life, and David feeling like he's being oppressed by the people around him. David urges them to say, trust God, pray. Look for God's deliverance to come from God. That's your only hope. It may not come in ways that you think it's going to come, but it will come from God. If you want to be long-lived, and that's what he means by, do you want, which of you desires life and covets many days to enjoy good? He says, keep your integrity. Keep your integrity throughout this. It's very interesting, David screws up several times during this thing. He eats the bread that's designed only for the priests, or designated only for them. He effectively lies, all right, when he fakes his madness. Are we being told, don't be like David? It's very interesting that they would connect this psalm with that event in David's life. Is this what David wants to tell the person who's going through what he's going through? Is he saying sometimes don't follow my example? I know, though, what it is that you're facing. The face of the Lord is against the evildoers. You have to trust that, because sometimes it's very hard to see. Before we go, I want to notice two things in this text that show up later. The first of them is when he says at the beginning of the psalm, when he says, "My boast will be in the Lord." That's who I was going to boast in, all right? That I am going to boast only in the Lord. Does that sound familiar? It might. That sounds very much like what the Apostle Paul says in several of his letters. When he says, where is boasting? Romans chapter 3. Is it excluded? Yes. No. On the principle of what principle? On the principle of Christ. Now my boast. All of my sense of victory, accomplishment, and success is located in Jesus Christ, not in myself. The good that happens is of God and of Christ. It's not Paul or Saul of Tarsus or Phil Brandt of Portland. It's all belongs to God. And of course, the other one that you may have noticed toward the end of the psalm is when he says, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord rescues them from them all. He keeps their bones, and not one of them will be broken. The gospel writers, particularly John, picks up that bit and points out that when Jesus was crucified, they came and would break the legs of the crucified lest they hang on the cross through the Sabbath, that holy Sabbath of Passover. But when they came to Jesus, he was already dead. And so all they did was stick a spear in his side to see, and blood and water gushed forth, says John. He says, I saw it with my own eyes. And he says, this was to fulfill what was written about him. Not one of his bones will be broken. This is one of the deep mysteries of reading these Psalms. They are oftentimes layered upon layered in their meaning, that as they speak to those exilic people, they're also and always pointing them ahead to this work of God in our Lord Jesus Christ. Think about that. Pray about that. If you can come on Sunday, we hope we'll see you then. God bless you.